Hello everyone, good evening. Can everyone hear me properly? Okay. Thank you very much for joining me, for everyone who's been waiting. And welcome back to our nightly live stream. Good evening, obviously morning or afternoon, depending on where you are. Thank you so much for joining me. For everyone new, we're having live streams almost every single night. I do my best to have live streams every single night, apart from my regular videos that I do, just to communicate with the community, the subscribers, the members of this channel, discuss obviously the latest updates, the most significant updates. And obviously this is for you to share your views and thoughts as well. I consider it to be your platform too. And I'll hopefully answer as many of your questions as much as possible. Obviously, excuse me and sorry in advance if I'm unable to obviously address all of your comments and questions, but I'll do my best. In my previous video that you can watch after this live stream, I spoke about the latest updates from Gaza. So obviously Israel's been talking a lot about the fact that they dismantled all of the brigades of particularly Hamas. They're not talking about the other resistance groups, but we're increasingly seeing more and more activity in other parts of Gaza. So I went into detail with all of the latest events on the ground, because obviously these are things you don't really hear at all on mainstream media. So it's just important to highlight them. Obviously, when it comes to the Arabic crowd, Arabic speakers who also watch Arabic news, you will find some of them. But for English speaking, you won't see a lot of them. That's why I constantly highlight them, so people get an understanding about obviously the suffering of the people, but also the acts of the resistance against the Israeli occupation forces in Gaza. But tonight, for the live stream, I wanted to focus more about the Ansarullah movement, the Houthis, and Abdul Malik al-Houthi, the Houthi leader who had speech, and also the spokesperson for the Ansarullah army, Yahya al-Sari'. I also wanted to talk about China deploying Fleet 46 to join Fleet 45 in the Red Sea and the potential meanings for that. Obviously, we might speak about other subjects too. And after I finish the presentation, obviously feel free to comment and share your thoughts, and obviously ask questions. If anyone is asking questions, obviously if you could highlight them so I can address them quickly. We'll obviously try and address the most relevant ones to the subjects that we are talking about. So with regards to Abdul Malik al-Houthi, particularly, he had quite a long speech, and I listened to the main bits of the speech that I wanted to share with you. And then I'll reach Yahya Sari', who's the military spokesperson, who talks more about the day-to-day activities of the Ansarullah movement in Yemen against obviously the British and American genocide coalition and Israel as well. With regards to Abd al-Malik al-Houthi, he criticized the Muslim leaders a lot. He criticized the Muslim countries, and he said that the lack of courage of Muslim and Arab countries is what's giving Israel the courage to commit these atrocities in Gaza. He also obviously criticized constant US vetoes, and he said that everyone is gonna pass and can pass in peace from Bab el-Mandeb or Khalij Adan Aden Gulf, apart from US and UK supporters, obviously, of genocidal Israel and any ships that are linked to Israel. He spoke a lot about the suffering of the people in Gaza. They mostly reiterate about the suffering of the people in Gaza. He said about the starvation in the northern part of Gaza. Obviously, there's starvation in multiple other parts of Gaza, but the north is facing very significant starvation, and people are dying because of starvation. He spoke about the deaths from the starvation, and he again is calling, where are the Arab countries? Where are the Arab countries that spend hundreds of billions on basically stupid things and divisive things in between Arab countries? Where are all of their billions when the people are suffering such a massive tragedy, such a massive genocide and starvation? So you're spending hundreds of billions. Obviously, he didn't name the states, but he said hundreds of billions you're spending on so many things. Can't you feed these people? He also confirmed, he gave a bit of statistics. He said that they launched in total 183 missiles and UAVs on Israel. And he said that 48 ships were targeted. Another very interesting thing that he said is that the attacks in the Arab Sea, the Aden Gulf, and Bab el-Mandeb will escalate in quality and quantity. They previously said that they have things that they can do that they haven't done yet. So this could be another step from Ansarullah to increase the level of attacks, whether against Israeli-linked ships or British and American genocide coalition supporters. With regards to Yahya Sari', Yahya Sari' is the spokesperson for the Yemeni army, Ansarullah. He said that in retaliation to US and British attacks on Yemen, they carried out 3 recent attacks. One of them was a missile and UAV on al-Rashrash or Eilat in the southern part of Israel. He said that in the Gulf of Aden, they attacked a British ship with multiple missiles, hitting it and burning it. And the third attack was against a US destroyer in the Red Sea. They attacked it with UAVs. He also said that the Yemeni armed forces, according to him, continues to commit its religious, moral, and human obligations towards the oppressed Palestinian people and to protect Yemen from the aggression of the British and US troops. So they're clearly continuing their path. The genocide coalition isn't helping very much, isn't really that effective. They also stated, by the way, that the attacks in Yemen weren't very effective, and they're clearly raising the bar when it comes to this. One other thing that they also mentioned is that they're planning to start targeting submarines. That's another development. So far, they only attacked ships. Now they say we will be attacking submarines with the relevant weapons. Another very important development that I wanted to talk about briefly is China sending warships. So China sending Fleet 46 to accompany Fleet 45 that they deployed very shortly after things started to escalate in the Red Sea, and after the US started sending their aircraft carriers to the Mediterranean. You obviously had Russia saying permanent deployment of Air Force close, and that can target the now that left obviously the US warships and aircraft carrier. And now they're saying they're sending Fleet 46. So The declared objective of this deployment is to protection from potential hijacks and interceptions, right? However, and this fleet, obviously it went out from a military port in the southern part of China. The thing with China, though, they don't really say anything dangerous when it comes to their deployment. And many analysts in the beginning said that China sending these ships to Bab el-Mandeb to show that we are able to protect, if necessary, the global trade. They obviously didn't want to support Israel because they're against what Israel's doing. Don't forget, since the beginning of this genocide, it was China and Russia that proposed a ceasefire twice. And obviously, Britain and the US and other countries, they were against it, but primarily the United States administration and the British government, they rejected it, they vetoed it. So they are not going to help Israel, clearly, and also they refused calls for assistance from ships that were linked with Israel. As a matter of fact, they didn't even respond. So there was one instance where a ship that was linked to Israel was under attack. It asked for help from the Chinese fleet, basically, and they didn't even respond to them. So this was probably like a test balloon, right? To check if they're there to actually protect the whole trade, or are they there to send another message that we're here, and in case the United States obviously fails, we as a superpower, as a global power, are able to send that message. With regards to this current deployment, I mean, again, the objective is, as stated, they're trained on fighting potential hijacking or what have you. However, they were never under threat anyway. So any Chinese ship going from Bab el-Mandeb wasn't under threat. The Ansarullah, the Yemenis, they declared that they will never attack any ship that is not linked to Israel, and that's clearly evident. And they constantly reassure all of the countries that the global trade is fine, apart from Israel, because we are implementing a blockade on them because they're committing a genocide against the Palestinian people. And once this aggression stops, we will stop. It's as simple as that. But obviously, you've had the United States and the Genocide Coalition. They didn't like that because to them, they want Israel to function freely. They don't want to have any sort of boycotts on them. So they rejected that notion, right? Despite the fact that when you talk about the United States administration, the government, and many members of NATO even, they will go on to every single country that they don't like, even if just 1% of what Israel committed in Gaza has been committed by that country that they do not like. So this is what I wanted to mainly talk about in this live stream. Obviously, I'll open up the space for you to participate with any questions so I can answer as many as possible from them. And obviously, with regards to my previous video, you can also watch it after the live stream with regards to the latest updates from Gaza and from Lebanon. We had an intense day in Lebanon too, but clearly this isn't the biggest response from Hezbollah yet. They clearly still have something hidden and prepared for Israel as a retaliation. So let's begin with the questions you have for me. Excuse me. I'll start off with Beyond Babylon. Hello, Christian here, highly interested in listening to your viewpoint. I do not support the false Israel to a true Christian, or should I say Jew, according to who we call Paul. Thank you, firstly. And yeah, absolutely. I mean, we reiterate, I reiterate a lot, constantly, that we're not talking about a religious battle here. It's not a religious war against followers of a certain faith. Israel wants to drag everyone into that battle, by the way. Israel wants it to be viewed as an attack against the Jewish people, right? To attract sympathy. However, that's number one, that's debunked by many anti-Zionist Israelis already. It's debunked by many Jewish groups, whether religious or non-religious groups. And it's debunked by the actions of the Palestinian resistance, right? Like many of the lies that they constantly sell is like Hamas, for example, is after the Jewish people, despite the fact that their charter clearly states that they don't have a problem and they are not fighting Israel because they call themselves the Jewish state, right? And that they have a problem against occupying oppressive Zionism. And it's important to constantly highlight this and not get dragged into this sectarian tone, this divisive tone that isn't beneficial and isn't even true. We constantly reiterate Israel is using Judaism as a facade. They try to convert Judaism from a religion to ethnicity, something which is very dangerous and very wrong. They're probably the worst thing that ever happened to the Jewish people. And if they're talking, if we're going to accept the fact that they are indeed talking on behalf of the Jewish people, well, what kind of image are you giving? It's like a Muslim country, for example, speaking on behalf of Islam, even though no one is entitled to speak on behalf of Islam, for example, saying that I'm committing this because of my Islamic teachings. And everyone agreeing to the notion that this country is justifying its acts or is establishing its morals based on religion. So this notion is very dangerous. And thank you, obviously, for your input. Mona just downloaded your book today. Curious to read and see if your style of writing is as calming as your speaking style. Are you really as soft-spoken in your daily life? Lol. I think if you read my book, you will see a very similar tone to what I speak, because like I wanted to have a YouTube channel since a very long time ago, but I wasn't sure what I would speak about really. And my book encouraged me to start speaking about my book in chapters about just over a year ago. And you will see the same consistent tone when it comes to this, because the tone is as important as the message, really. And that's not to blame anyone or say that, for example, if someone is emotionally more outraged, right, or shows a bit more anger or emotion in his speech, I think that's completely natural. I obviously have my moments, I'm a human being. Obviously, you can get outraged, you can. But I think when you present and speak with people, it's important to be composed, because you're sending a message. Someone is listening to you. Even if you're not talking about millions, it doesn't really matter. It's important to do that. So I hope that clarifies. Beyond Babylon is also asking, does anyone here think October the 7th was a full flag, over-exaggerated, or outright fake? My simple answer to that is there was planning for 7th of October. As a matter of fact, Hamas made it public in many cases, right? The event itself and the action obviously was very secretive from the Hamas side, right? But before 1 year before Hamas carried out the 7th of October attacks, they had a banner on one of their monitoring points in Gaza overlooking Israel. Do you know what it stated with a big banner 1 year before? Be'eri, here we come. That's one of the kibbutzes that they reached. They also published a series on television that I also spoke about 1 year before the 7th of October, portraying almost everything they did on the 7th of October. Attacking the Gaza division, kidnapping soldiers, and reaching Israeli territory. Did that not ring alarm bells in Israel? Was no one worried in Israel? You're talking about a country that lives on, intel and anticipating and trying to prevent things from happening. Also, you had, despite that planning, again from Hamas and the messages that they were sending, we've heard the report that they were notified by Egypt that something might happen. We had another notification from one Israeli soldier on the 6th of October saying that she witnessed, it was a female soldier in the Israeli army, suspicious movements from Gaza. She notified her commander and she was ignored. There are inquiries going on in Israel about this. Private so far, not state level, but over 40 families are being represented by a couple of very heavy lawyers in Israel against the security establishment in Israel and the military for not preventing the 7th of October. Then you obviously had, so apart from these small notions, small kind of tips about something's gonna happen, that's number one. Then you had, we've established the fact that Hamas definitely did plan and wanted to carry something out. Then you had the 7th of October itself. The 7th of October itself, you've had the manipulations of the events. For example, the massacres with the revelers, they were committed by Israel, by Israeli Apache helicopters. And they published images of them on Israeli television. Then you had one of the kibbutzes, Be'eri, right? That witnessed one of the highest number of civilian casualties from Israel. Again, the side that was indiscriminately bombing was Israel. Israel went into a tank to one of its kibbutzes, shooting at Israeli homes without establishing who's in them and what's happening. Many Israeli witnesses who survived from these kibbutzes from the early days said that most civilians were killed due to crossfire and that they were reassured by Hamas fighters that they weren't there to kill them directly. Then you've had the people who were kidnapped to Gaza and released. Most notably, Yocheved Lifshitz. She was released on a humanitarian basis. In the beginning of the war, Hamas wanted to release her without any exchange, without anything in return. Israel refused. Hamas persisted. They ended up releasing her to Egypt. Egypt then sent her to Israel. Everything was still fresh back then. She went on to have a press conference with her children, and she described everything about the treatment, the level of good treatment she got from the resistance, the whole journey, which was obviously traumatizing for her, and how Israel was attacking them through every point that they went through in Gaza. All of these things started to make this theory that Israel knew, wanted this, and attacked everyone. It's a little bit more complicated than that. There's a little bit more to it. There definitely was a plan. The Palestinians, in terms of do they have reason to do something against Israel? Well, you're seeing now exactly why they attacked Israel. So what Israel's been doing now in the past 4 months, it has been doing the same thing on a lower heat for the past 75 years. They obviously had the mass expulsions and the Nakba in 1948. They had 1967. More people were expelled from their homes. And the Palestinians have been living in misery and suffering for all of this time. So, in terms of reasons, they had reasons, right? However, Israel capitalized on, they probably enabled something to happen as well for their own purposes. Israel already had a plan for Gaza. They have a plan dating back to the 70s to expel the population of Gaza because it's a big population. Israel is all about the demographics in Israel. They always want to have more Jews than Arabs, right? And Gaza was always a resistance hub, even from a long time ago. Even just after 1948, it was a resistance hub. And now it's full of refugees from 1948 territories who were expelled from historical Palestine. That is Israel nowadays. And you've seen it evident from the actions that they took and are taking. Obviously, they're failing, right, miserably, but it was evident, all of this plan to expel the population, have an ethnic cleansing campaign, and resettle in Gaza. So I hope that clarifies. And greetings to everyone joining. Okay. Okay, interesting question from AB CD. Do they teach both Arabic and Hebrew in the Zionist occupied entity, and how much prejudice, discrimination towards Arabs, re-education, healthcare, employment, social services living under their rule? Very interesting question. So in terms of education, in Israel, it's mostly Jewish majority schools and Arab majority schools. Both schools belong to, officially, the Ministry of Education in Israel. There are few mixed schools, but the number is very, very small. Israel does that deliberately. Why? Because they're promoting a pseudo-narrative. They're promoting a false history. They're promoting indoctrination and propaganda. How are you going to promote it if you're going to be studying with Arabs and Palestinians who have a completely different story to tell? They don't want to expose their population to other people. That's why many of them have problems with mixed cities, they call them in Israel. Like, for example, Haifa, where I was born, you have Jews and Arabs, and both sides know the cultures. Some of them have friendships, work together. In the healthcare system, the majority of staff are Arab. They're running healthcare in Israel. You have many professors in academia in Israel who are Arab, Palestinian. But Israel, obviously, because it was established on this segregation, on this supremacy, on apartheid, they, with the population, specifically the Palestinians inside of Israel, they were very careful on how they push for the education system and all of these things. In terms of prejudice, there's a lot of prejudice in the less demand industries. So if you will look for a job, apply for a job, for example, I don't know, in any company, usually if there is a Jewish person, he will take the job, even though he might have less skills than you. Like, for example, one of the biggest supermarket network, the founder of the company is called Rami Levy. He has this supermarket network in Israel that is very, very cheap, and many people go and buy. But he has many, many Arab employees because they make up a lot of the workforce. The other day he had a statement in a live interview saying, if I could, I wouldn't employ anyone Arab. And that's acceptable. and that's acceptable. Don't get me wrong, there are other scenarios where things are a little bit different, but that's the common theme. Now, that's a country filled with prejudice, filled with apartheid. Even if you talk about the Palestinian citizens in Israel. Why? Because it's in law. You have something called the nation state law. The nation state law says that Israel belongs to the Jewish people. So, what about everyone else? What about non Jews? Right? They're not even implementing that on the Jews who are anti Zionists. Like if you go, for example, to Me'a She'arim, which is an Orthodox community neighborhood in Jerusalem, you will see many Jewish people raising the Palestinian flag. They're brutalized by the Zionist police, by the Israeli police. They don't like them. So it's a flawed system. It's a flawed system in its essence, from its beginning. That's why I call for dismantling it as a whole, because it's simply a dark Middle Age ideology and system implemented in Israel that shouldn't really exist in the 21st century. Jetmir Reka, salam alaikum, brother. Can you tell us more about the Samsung option? Is it real? Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Yes, definitely it is there. Look, Israel's preparing. Question is, will they like go on a suicide mission if they think everything is failing? I'm not sure. If you're talking about the people in the top, like look at what they're doing now. They're killing their own people. They killed over 80 of their prisoners in Gaza. On the 7th of October, they committed the massacres against their own population. This is a death machine. This is a death machine. This is a country that kills itself, right? So it's definitely there. It's definitely an option. Will they use it as a last resort? The question is, what would be to them the red line, and will they really commit at such a massive scale? We're not there yet, right? Even though things are really, really tense when it comes to Israel. I mean, you have many people in Israel, whether analysts or many people, maybe regular people, citizens, saying this is the worst time in the history of this country. People are saying it resembles 1948 when we were just establishing our country. So they're living in a very tough situation, but obviously the days will come and reveal exactly what actions they will take. Look, they spoke about nuclear. They spoke about nuclear, using nukes in Gaza. Obviously, if they use nukes in Gaza, they're killing their soldiers. And there's radiation on Israel because it's so close. But, I wouldn't put anything past them because what they've committed in the past almost 5 months just shows that these people are a genocidal satanic death cult. Thank you for everyone sending supers. Joseph, Roy, and Sheena. Sheena's asking me an interesting question. Could you mention where AIPAC gets their money? Interesting. Well, if you look at the Federal Reserve in America, I mean, look into the Federal Reserve. It's supposedly like many people would think it's something controlled by belongs to the U.S. government. It's private. 7 companies control the Federal Reserve. They print money whenever they want to. They print money whenever they want to. The taxation system. How they fund the military-industrial complex. how they provide aid for Israel. I mean, it's getting people are getting to know this more and more, right? It's been clear to anyone observing it from a very long time ago. But if you look at the funding, for example, for Israel, apart from APAC, because APAC you can say part of Israel, and the money it'll be printed and given in any way, shape, or form. These people, money is not a problem for them, right? You have a group of people, a network with them, with bankers, and again, people who print money. But if you look at, and this is a prime example of how things really work, look at the US aid for Israel or for foreign countries that are their allies. What do? They take your money, they take taxpayers' money, send it as foreign aid. Most of the time, it doesn't leave the US. So the money's still in the US, not like they send the money to Israel. Why? Because it's conditional. What's the condition? You buy from American companies. So the money's in the US, but that aid is for Israel. We're helping Israel because we love them. The money goes to the military industrial complex, the big companies sending the ammunition, the jets, all of these things. It's a very corrupt system. Money is not an issue for them. But I think the important thing to highlight here is to highlight the requirement and the need to get money out of politics altogether. This is what should be done. You need to take money out of politics. You need to break that relationship between massive, big interest elites and companies and politics. You know what I mean? Because you're having politicians brought and purchased in broad daylight, whether it's in the US or here in Britain as well. The Zionist lobby is very strong. You have politicians declaring that they're Zionists, and no one is outraged by that. You know, their politician, their leader, declaring that they're a Zionist, it's as if it's fine. So if your leader declares they're a Zionist, that they support a genocidal country, perfectly acceptable. Sister from NY, are there any circumstances under which China or Russia would get involved militarily, or is that wishful thinking? I always state, in my opinion, that big countries, even countries smaller than China and Russia in terms of capability, like Iran or Egypt or Turkey, they will only get involved once they feel like the threat is coming to them, or potentially in a case that they see that there is a formation looking to do something beyond what's happening now. I wouldn't be surprised if they already have strategic kind of dealings in between each other to prepare for that day, because China will be with Russia. They will stand together. If Iran is attacked, that will be a red line for China and Russia. So there is that possibility. And the fascinating thing here, and don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to defend the regimes and the systems in China and in Russia, don't get me wrong. But when it comes to the tone of the leadership, in terms of responsibility, non-hostility, right? They are way, way more diplomatic than Western leaders. The inflammatory people are here. The inflammatory people are the British Prime Minister, the US President, the administrations in Western countries. They are the people who cause flames and, they're our enemy and this and that. If you actually listen to Putin, if you listen to Xi Jinping, obviously, again, I'm not endorsing them or accepting their political ideologies or how they run their countries, but I'm just saying in terms of internationally, right? They're way more reasonable. The threat to peace is here. It's not there. It's not coming from Russia and China. But you've had a country like the United States, and obviously everyone else's followers, they're like the US poodles. But when it comes to the US, I mean, you're talking about a country, and again, in terms of administration, right? We're not talking about the people. And the people are you. We're seeing the people and what they think. They've had enough. They don't represent them, many of them say. But if you talk about the United States administration, not long ago, they used to call Latin America our backyard. All of Latin America, our backyard. This is how they treat the world. You know, they want hegemony all across. They talk about China sending ships to the China Sea. What the hell are you doing there even? It is the Sea of China. It's a big country. What are you doing there? Would you like Chinese ships off your coast and then them getting upset about you for deploying your ship? And Israel has that same mentality. They're entitled to do everything because it's theirs, right? And no one else can do anything. So we need to understand the mentality of how these people operate to understand really what's happening and, you know, why they show so much hostility to China and Russia. And some people in the US administration think they still live in the 50s. It's not post-World War II. It's not the same dynamics. Things are changing. And we need a world with more powers to stop this dictatorship. What's happening now is authoritarianism, global authoritarianism. You have a rogue state, a genocidal state like Israel, committing genocide against people, 100,000 casualties, using starvation as a tool of war, and the US vetoes everything against it. And they're not taking it. As a matter of fact, they're declaring their support for it and demonizing everyone else who doesn't support it. It's absurd, and this must change. And it's on the way to change. And I think Gaza is just accelerating this. And people globally are understanding that this is a global fight against tyranny. It's not just the Palestinians against the Zionist occupiers. It's much bigger than that. Because they're seeing their countries like, well, hold on a second, well, what are you doing? What are you doing? You're supporting this country, right? But things are changing. Helen, our member, thank you so much. Mahmoud, I'm in love with your mind. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being here too. Today, this century, this universe, no question. Just here, lapping up your easy on the ear delivery, sending much love to all of you, to you, Helen, and everyone else. Thank you so much. And I'm sorry if I'm missing some of the comments, by the way. Nathan, Habibi, which country are you in? I'm in Britain, the United Kingdom. Trabzon is saying China has a massive military base across the pond in Djibouti. China is very much established in Africa. And the interesting thing about their presence in Africa is they're actually supporting these African nations. They're, you know, building infrastructure, supporting them be more independent. In many cases, if the African countries are suffering from hardship, they will lift their debts. So they'll support them for debt, right? A couple of years ago, they wrote off like 50 billion in debt. Now, compare that approach to the European approach historically with Africa. Let's go to the other questions. Gully Berg is asking, could the IOF soldiers be stacking up weapons from Gaza to start a civil war? Look, the Israeli society, there's a lot of weapons. in Israel. The Minister of National Security, Itamar Ben-Gvir, he actually accelerated sending weapons and giving weapon licenses to Israeli citizens, supposedly to protect them, to protect themselves, right? But he did it for them to have a very easy hand on the trigger when it comes to any Arab. This is how the people view it. But that's more corruption. So they would sometimes they would sell it to people who are hostile to them. Like there was an interview a very long time ago, about over 20 years ago maybe, with a leader from the Hamas military wing. His name was Ahmed al-Ja'bari. Israel assassinated him later on. He was asked, and that was in Gaza, where'd you get your weapons from? He said, many of our weapons come from Israel. Corrupt people in the IDF, they sell weapons and they don't care because they'll get money. And they'll send them to criminal organizations in Israel. Criminal organizations in Israel are, very well equipped. And some of them were in the army previously. So they have their many reasons to do that. The IDF is obviously worried from it going to the wrong hands. And they're also worried about how easily it can be stolen. But all of this highlights the level of chaos. How can people access such ammunition? Who is monitoring it? Do you not have any checks, regular checks about the ammunition you have? But clearly, if look what's happening in Gaza, and then you wouldn't be so surprised. Oryx, our member, is saying, what's your thoughts on US threatening Iran for sending Russia short-range surface-to-surface missiles? I mean, how long have the US been threatening Iran? They've been threatening them so many past few decades. They've been threatening Iran. What happened with Iran? They continue to develop, and I don't think they will be very effective. They know Iran, they know their capability. As a matter of fact, weren't they dealing with Iran in Iraq? Come on, how did Iran gain so much strength in Iraq, for example? They had dealings with them, and then they had the deals with obviously the nuclear program for Iran that Trump, just for popularity, kind of blocked it, right? But I think they're empty threats. Irma, thank you so much for your super, and I'm sorry if I missed anyone. Ari Magoo, hi Mahmoud, how accurate are Houthi attacks on Israel and can Israel retaliate? They're very accurate, and Israel doesn't have to retaliate. You have Britain and US doing it on its behalf. That's why we call it the Genocide Coalition. Samba boy, thank you. This is an interesting question. I think many people would want to know the answer to this, including me, really. But all we can do is really analyze and kind of try and project where things are going, even though no one knows exactly what will happen. But Tansid is asking, how far will this go? What do you think? I'll tell you something. When I woke up on the 7th of October and read about what Hamas did, launching 5,000 missiles on Israel in 25 minutes, taking down the Gaza division, invading and taking over Israeli territory, and kidnapping so many Israeli soldiers, I thought Israel ended on the day. Israel as we know it, I thought it ended on the day. Israel never witnessed anything like this previously. And no matter how they try and get out of this, it wouldn't be good. If they get out of this through a deal, they have to live with a threat at that level. That's number one. If they don't get out of it without a deal, well, you couldn't get out of it without a deal previously, when they did far less than that. So in many ways, that's, look, we can't say impossible, right? But in many ways, it is impossible. So, and again, like in terms of my projection, I think you will either have, and I said it before, a temporary deal with a continued conflict similar to what happened before. But again, this time it's so significant that nothing is going back to before the 7th of October. So, but you can have that, like a temporary reduction in what's happening. They get a deal, temporary deal, could potentially reach a permanent ceasefire at some point, even though that's also unlikely. But then you have an ongoing conflict because the core root of the problem did not end. Or you can have an ongoing war until one side is defeated. That's the other option, right? It's not looking like, look, we sometimes you see like there are, rays of hope for a deal and seeing things to quieten down, right? And having a bit of normality. I mean, mostly we're thinking about the people of Gaza. That's the number thing on my mind personally. But it's not really looking like it. And if that's the case, then you're talking about an ongoing thing. But that's why we constantly state here, right? I state simple because you're not dealing with it from its root. Its root is the regime of supremacy, the regime of apartheid, the regime of oppression, of ethnic, religious supremacy and racism in Israel. Dismantle that regime, and you will have a solution the next day. I got a question in Arabic if fighters are going to Gaza to fight with the Palestinians from other countries. No, not to my knowledge. Irma, our member, thank you for your membership. She said, I heard China sending, hold on a second, where that message disappear. But you asked me about another base in Russia in Syria from Russia. Look, Russia's very established in Syria. The recent development that I heard was a permanent deployment in the Golan Heights. Permanent deployment in the Golan Heights, supposedly to monitor the situation. So for them to monitor things. But Israel is not convinced by that. Israel is saying they're sending a threatening message to us that we're here and don't cross the lines. Because, and I'll remind people, Israel always tried to cause friction between the Syrian regime and Russia. Because Russia have their own port in Syria. Many territories are controlled by Russia, like Tartus. But I think it was in 2018, Syria has air defense systems. Many of them are controlled by Russia, but they have their own defense systems that they also use. Israel knew that there was a Russian plane in the air at the time. They decided to attack. When they attacked, it sent signals to the air defense systems. Air defense systems went out and they went very close to that Russian plane, even though they have agreements with them that they won't have any aerial activity when Russia's there, right? And they shot the Russian plane, killing about 18 people. Russia realized what Israel was doing, and they were fuming with Israel back at the time. So Israel doesn't like it, but Russia is established very well in Syria. They could potentially be doing something. The recent thing I heard, however, was about the permanent deployment in the Golan Heights, but not in the form of a base, but like helicopters and jets, etc. Let's go to the next question. Kim Willman is asking me what we started at 9:30. I usually post on the community tab what time we will start, and you will see it on the link of the live stream. It will usually say exactly when it starts. Giovanni Di Capo is asking, Putin invited Hamas leaders to Moscow. Did they meet with Putin yet? If they go to Moscow, they most likely won't meet with Putin unless they have a secret meeting. They will meet with the relevant representatives. I've heard reports about this recent meeting, but I couldn't really verify it from any source. Some of my viewers actually sent me some of them, but I couldn't verify. The last meeting they had was just a few months back, because Russia always talks with Hamas. But if they would, I don't think they would meet with Putin directly. Okay, sorry if I'm taking a bit of time, just going through the next question. Blue Anon, did the IDF capture Sinwar? No, they haven't. Del Sendero, Reuters reported that Israel economy in the fourth quarter last year with a 20% drop in GDP. How can that be sustainable? In any normal country, that's not sustainable. If any country was going through what Israel went through, that wouldn't be sustainable. And I always repeat, Israel has a perfect recipe for immediate intervention and complete regime change and law change and everything. But obviously the powers behind it, they don't want to do that. Excuse me, it's still sustainable because it has the backing of the most powerful military force now, arguably, right? In the world, people who print money. Money is the last thing Israel worries about. So they'll bring money, they'll have money, because they are a neo-colonial project of the very big powers. And these big powers, they have money, they print money. I mean, we spoke about the Federal Reserve, how it functions. Israel is a produce of that, but I'm not sure for how long it will be viable for them to support this entity, because it's becoming increasingly more untenable with what it's doing, even to its closest allies and supporters. And we spoke about in one of my previous recent videos about the fact that Israel is actually worried about how it is perceived in the world, how other countries portray it and deal with it, the negative feedback that they're getting from many countries, including very close allies, especially when it came to the Munich Security Conference. There was a report in Ma'arif that I spoke about in just one of my previous videos. I can't even remember the thumbnail now because I'm making so much videos. But if you look at a couple of some of my previous videos, you'll see exactly how worried they are. But yeah, that's how they constantly have powers to support them financially. But there's a limit. There's a limit to how far they can go, because don't forget, people are already being put off dealing with them, especially because of the ICJ. I mean, the ICJ in many cases wasn't effective in stopping the genocide, which is the most important thing. But its effectivity is very, very noticeable when it comes to countries dealing with Israel. You know, cutting financial ties, not like Netherlands not supporting with parts for the F-35 the other day. Reports about Japan canceling a few things with them. And don't forget, Israel has a very advanced tech industry, right? Many startups are in Israel. Many international and global companies have bases in Israel. Um, so to them, how can we remain in a war-torn country led by such an unreasonable government that's not looking one day ahead and just acting out of pure hate and vengeance and racism, committing this genocide against civilians and not listening to anyone or anything? So that's not going to be sustainable. But in the meantime, that's how they're surviving, really. Toblerone, there are two regional military powers that could intervene and change balance in the Hamas-Hezbollah Zionist conflict, Turkey and Egypt. What are your thoughts on that happening? Very similar to when you talk about bigger countries intervening. Unless they are directly threatened, I don't think they will take direct actions, because countries intervening directly, it has judicial, political, and military implications. So that's why Iran will, Iranian allies will participate, but not Iran as a country, because they don't want the implications. They don't want anything happening against Iran as a country, right? So, and I mean, look, Israel could be receiving things, but the main thing, the main country, by the way, if we're talking about another country intervening, the main country that's in question of a possible intervention, and I know some of you obviously might not agree with this, is Egypt. Why? Because it has the biggest border to the south of Israel. Jordan has the biggest border to the east. Egypt has the, and clearly they've clearly threatened Israel behind closed doors about the operation in Rafah. That's not to say Israel might not go ahead with it, but their relations are at an all-time low. I mean, you have officials, like previous top officials in the Egyptian army. Well, like one of them is called Samir Faraj, for example. He had an interview with Al Jazeera the other day, and he was asked if Israel was still the strategic enemy of Egypt. And he said Israel has always been the strategic enemy of Israel, despite the peace treaty with them. And you're talking about people who have the highest rankings previously, okay, in the military. Now, again, I state again that Egypt constantly uses a diplomatic tone as much as possible. But lately, look at their foreign minister like Sameh Shukri. He was saying that America can't be constantly vetoing this. It's not a possible thing to continue doing, right? Even though they have good ties with America. I mean, they're clear that they've been shifting away from America. Let's not forget that, Egypt. But if there's likelihood of any state intervention, it would be Egypt, but they're trying not to get there. They've just joined BRICS. They have a tough economic situation. Again, please don't take it as a justification for lack of action from me. I'm just analyzing, right? Turkey would join if there would be something else forming against them potentially, because despite the fact that Turkey is a member of the NATO, well, the biggest NATO member, the US, Turkey blamed them for the military coup attempt in 2016. Let's not forget that. So it's not like they're in a honeymoon together. Henry's asking, I've seen an AJ documentary in August last year showing Palestinian self-defense militia in Jenin, and they had all AR-15 NATO rifles, not Kalashnikovs. Where do they think they come from? Well, it could be coming from many places. So you have the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinian Authority is in dealings with Israel, and they also sometimes get weapons from the US. So there could be people from the Palestinian Authority giving these weapons or selling them, right, behind people's back to some of the people who oppose Israel. Because don't forget, despite the fact that the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank has security ties with Israel and is very much aligned with it, it's not like all of them are happy with what Israel does. Like there was a few months ago, one of the security forces member, he participated with people fighting against Israel, and the Palestinian Authority gave him like a state funeral, and Israel was fuming. That's obviously not to say that that's their official position now. No, they're still tied with Israel, still tied with their agreements with Israel, their security agreements with Israel, which is ridiculous because Israel's always been pushing and pushing for more expansion, more oppression, more killings in the West Bank. But that's where that could be coming from. Amir Khan, thank you for your super, and everyone sending comments. I'm sorry if I'm unable to read through all of them. We're just going to go through the main kind of questions for the time limit. Leslie Rivera, what is the point? What is the use of the UN if one vote can block a majority vote? Exactly. Absolutely. And I think it's becoming... Look, we've known that from a very long time ago because, like, it's not the first. The US vetoed like 80 times in favor of Israel on its own. So we've seen this absurd situation for so long. But yeah, firstly, why are there permanent members of the UN Security Council? That's number one. Well, then secondly, how can one state have this power to go against everyone? Do you know what I mean? How can they have the power to go against everyone? And people need to remember here, they're shaping in the minds of the people through their propaganda that, you know, the world is against, for example, Hamas. Let's take Hamas as an example, right? What world are we talking about? Let's say you're talking about Hamas and Israel and the Palestinian conflict, and they label Hamas a terrorist organization. Who labels them as a terrorist organization? 34 countries. EU plus 7 countries. Who are these countries? Obviously, mostly Europe, then the US, then Canada, then the UK, Israel, obviously, Paraguay, Japan, and some other country. That's like 17% of the world. Yet they want to portray it as an image of the world. I mean, you're not representing a tiny minority of the world. And plus, even if you want to go through that argument as well, you're not even representing your own people. Like, and this raises questions about democracy itself. Or do we actually live in a democracy when you can continue going ahead with things that people have been persistently protesting against, right? No regular referendums, no action to stop this genocide. But it just highlights that the UN, again, is a US tool. The UN was formed after the League of Nations, right? In a post-World War II era, where US was, you know, they had plans to take over everything. And they still have this mentality, the United States administration. And that's why they go against Russia. It's not like they're threatened by Russia. They're going against every agreement they had with Russia after the fall of the Soviet Union. They promised them they won't proceed east. They have proceeded. They included more NATO members. It's because they want Russia as a state. It's not because they don't want to be threatened by them, or it's because they want to take over. That's why. And the UN is clearly highlighting that. It's like a US front being used to as a soft power to achieve the political ambitions of the US administration that it really can't reach directly. Amir Khan is asking, what are the chances that the IOC will step in at least for the month of Ramadan and enforce humanitarian supplies of the holy month? I think the fact that they were unable to enforce anything now, to the contrary, as a matter of fact, Israel killed approximately over 4,000 people since they came up with this judgment. I don't think they'd be able to do anything before Ramadan, during Ramadan. And it's not like Israel has sympathy, right, for Ramadan. As a matter of fact, they're using it to even spew more venom against the Palestinians. Like, you had Bezalel Smotrich is saying, like, you're going to have a difficult Ramadan for the people in the West Bank. And now you have Benny Gantz, supposedly, right, Netanyahu's alternative, saying that, again, about Ramadan, like, you'll have a difficult Ramadan unless they release all of the hostages. They start attacks in Ramadan, they start attacks in Eid. I said it previously, like Satan is acting. Right, the holy month, yeah, let's attack them in Ramadan. So I don't think, I hope obviously we try and reach a temporary solution, some sort of a deal. But that's assuming that there's someone reasonable in Israel. There's no one reasonable in Israel. Ricky's saying, Salam Mahmoud, so much has happened. I truly feel this time we will see either a one-state or a two-state solution, maybe within the next 5 to 10 years. Or at the very least, Israel becoming an actual democracy. Look, I mean, Israel becoming an actual democracy, I'm not a person who kind of loses hope or whatever. But, you know, I've lived in Israel for 20 years, you know, you've constantly had calls for Israel to be a democracy. Like, there's one Arab party, Arab Palestinian party, that participates in the Israeli elections that always calls for a law. Do you know what the law calls for? Making Israel a country for all its citizens. In any normal country, that's the case already, right? A country for all its citizens. It's always rejected, this notion. Why is it always rejected? Because it's an apartheid supremacist state. Because they constantly bang on about them wanting Israel only to be for the Jewish people. And they have this nation-state law and all of these things. That can happen with enough pressure. Something similar to what happened in South Africa. If it reaches that stage, I mean, Israel is potentially pushing itself towards that stage. In terms of a two-state, I don't think it's going to be possible to implement it. But in terms of the time frame you've given, which is 5 to 10 years, things are moving so rapidly, day by day. I mean, when I want to come and talk to you in a video, prepare a video, and I'm posting like 2 a day regularly, there's so much more than what we talk about. Things are developing so rapidly, so quickly, that you sometimes can't catch up with everything. So it could be quicker than that, could be that. It could be longer than that, you know, God forbid. We don't want it to be longer than that. But I think what's important now is to, obviously everyone to their own capability, continue to obviously talk about it, raise awareness, obviously, and from my perspective, I'll still call for the solution that I always called for and believed in, a one state with equality. Whoever's happy living in such a state, let them live. Some racists don't like it. Go live in an island. Chocolate pudding, thank you for your super. Zaim. Zaim means leader in Arabic. Do you think Sisi has the ability to make decisions based on his country's interests, or is he more concerned about pleasing his bosses? Look, obviously we know Sisi came in a coup, um, but we also know he has always been in the army. So his establishment and his stronghold on Egypt is substantial. He has the support of the army because to the army he's always been an army person, right? He was the a defense minister for Morsi, the guy who he ousted. So he can, it's not that he cannot make decisions, he can make decisions. Pleasing his bosses, I mean, look, if you want to view it that way, let's say people, let's say, take the argument that people say, for example, America is his boss, Biden, for example. Has anyone seen how Biden was greeted when he went to Egypt the last time he went? Assisi himself didn't even visit him in the airport. Whereas when Erdogan went, he was waiting for him from down the plane, right? So things are changing and not everything is exactly as it's seen really. He can potentially make decisions, but when it comes to other countries, I mean, every country is going to have to think about everything before they make decisions. Their standing, their vulnerabilities. So, okay, let me tell you this. We're talking about nuclear weapon, and some people talk about nuclear war. It's easier to nuke Cairo. It's easier to drop a nuclear bomb on Cairo than Gaza, right? If something happens. Is Egypt prepared for that? Or have they completely taken that out of the equation, seeing what Israel's doing? So all of these things are taken into consideration. And again, it's not to justify or not justify a position. It's just an observation of what's happening. And thanks again for your super. Abdul Salim, how long can Hamas and other resistance groups survive with ammunition stock and food shortages? I mean, the fighters themselves, in 2014, after 2014, there was a documentary about them saying that they survived on a date, you know, sharing it between them for multiple days. And one of them actually dug water from under the ground and found some sort of water coming out, and this is how they survived. In terms of ammunition, they constantly produce during the war. They stated that previously, and they still state that now. Secondly, clearly there's still supply going in because we saw new weapons being introduced throughout this war. So something is coming from somewhere. And the fact that they've lasted for 5 months resisting supposedly this army, this paper tiger army that's been humiliated. It's an accomplishment for them. They're humiliating the Israeli army. Let's not forget that. And let's not forget what they did to the army on the 7th of October. Because people go and take the Israeli narrative about what Israel did in terms of massacres, and they forgot that they took down a whole division in the army, and now they're humiliating the army itself in Gaza. And obviously the Israeli army is acting against the civilians. They're massacring people. I mean, the last 24 hours, they massacred 47 residents. What for? What did they do? And in many cases, civilian buildings. Attacking in Nasser hospital and killing people in safe zones. So they'll tell them certain areas safe zones, killing them there. Like they did in the beginning of this genocide. Omar Sampson is asking, what about Turkey and the flotilla? I don't think they will send the flotilla unless things settle down. Because they look, Turkey said that they're going to send the flotilla after the initial attack on the flotilla. And they had some harsh statements with Israel, and they managed to release everyone that Israel captured, including other residents of other countries. Imagine. So the British people who were there and the American Britain didn't ask about them. So much for rights, right? And fighting for people's freedom. Turkey got them out. And you know who they got out? Residents of Israel, Palestinian residents of Israel who were on that flotilla. Israel told them at the time, it's none of your business, they're our citizens. They told them you need to take them out, and Israel took them out. One of them is called Ra'id Salah, who is a leader of the Islamic movement. And the other one was Hanin al-Zu'bi, who was an MK. They released them. But now, it doesn't look like they're going to send a flotilla unless things settle down slightly. Because it's very, very tense now, and look what they're doing. It's very, very dangerous to do that now. Miss Delmont, thank you for your super. Who should we vote for in the UK to support Gaza? Well, let me tell you from now. Anyone that condemned the Palestinian side is not a person to vote for. The Labour, the Tories, and the Lib Dems, they condemned the Palestinian side and were supporting Israel. Now, all of their talks are just trying to show you that, they're trying to get some voters back. They couldn't care less. They're corrupt, rotten from the core, these parties. The Tories, we all know them. We know what they've done, okay? Labour, evident, right? Look at what they did with Corbyn. Look at who they have as their leader now. Lib Dems, in many ways, they're the massive contributor to bringing the Tories to power from 2009 with their coalition. Nick Clegg. I don't trust any of the three big parties. In terms of the others, that's another debate, obviously. But definitely not these corrupt big parties. And to this day, some of them, they have the audacity to still support Israel, right? Sandy's asking, should we trust Hamas leadership? Is the cost of 7th of October worth all this killing? In your opinion, who should govern Gaza and the Palestinian people? Look, it's not about trust, really. Hamas is a movement that's been elected by the people of Gaza because they know what Israel's been doing to them, and we know what Israel's been doing to them. Hamas is a symptom to a virus called Israel. They're an antidote to a virus, even worse than a virus, called supremacist, Zionist, racist Israel. Was the 7th of October worth all of this killing? Again, that's if we consider that they anticipated such a response. I'm not sure they did. And again, it's important not to shift the blame from the people committing the actual massacre, Israel. In your opinion, who should govern Gaza and the Palestinian people? It's up to the Palestinian people to decide in the areas respectively. I'm a Palestinian, right? I can't decide on behalf of the Palestinians who are there. I'm not based there. So, but I'm a firm believer in people's power, people's democracy, right? Something that clearly many countries that promote do not follow and are against, clearly, evidently, from many countries across the world, whether in Latin America, Asia, Africa, and in Palestine. The first thing they've done with Hamas in 2006 is boycott them. Despite the fact that Jimmy Carter himself monitored those elections, previous president of the United States, and he said that they were the most democratic elections in the history of the Arab world. So there's all of these things to consider. But again, with every country, with every place, it's up to the people to decide. And again, we have a lot of talk about who should govern Gaza. It's about who should govern Israel and what Israel should look like. The argument should be, what about the day after in Israel, not in Gaza? Israel is the problem. The regime of supremacy, a country that's brutal enough and has the capacity and power and people to commit such an atrocious genocide. This is what shouldn't exist. This is what should be completely wiped off the face of the earth. in terms of regime and system enabling this in people, not obviously residents or whatever. We're talking about the system implemented, enabling such people to commit such, that should be wiped off the face of the earth. These things shouldn't really exist now. And again, when you talk about Gaza, when you talk about Hamas, when you talk about the Palestinian resistance, that's a symptom to a virus. Blue Anon, Houthi standing on business, they're still fighting, dude. And they're not backing down, and they're threatening submarines now. They're taking down ships of the genocide coalition. And yeah. Okay, let's take the last couple of questions. Ibrahim Zubair is asking, brother, to what extent is the IDF in control of Gaza? I saw they were constructing a road there from the east to the sea and carry out the plan to connect India to the west. Okay. So Israel, at the moment, as the map stands now, they have a couple of semi-permanent bases in Gaza. These bases are outside every major refugee camp or city, town, or neighborhood in Gaza. So you can't really call that based because you're lacking control of any significant part of Gaza. So let's say they have a big base in the northwestern part of Gaza, right? That's one of their bases there. Well, there's no city there. So, and Hamas's civil services are still acting. They're still functioning. Imagine the civil services, let alone the resistance. Israel obviously doesn't want that, but that shows you just how much they're not really based in there. In terms of that road, there could be many reasons for that. Their stated reason is to cut the north off the south. However, they've tried that from the beginning, and this did not work. Because Israel itself admitted that the Palestinian resistance is shifting and moving capability and expertise and weapons and people from the north to the south, and you still have people from the northern part of Gaza in the northern part of Gaza. The whole plan was to expel all of them, yet despite the hunger and the starvation, they don't want to leave. They don't want to leave because they know that this is Israel's ultimate plan, to expel them from their lands and complete the ethnic cleansing campaign and genocide in Gaza. Another question, U.S. intelligence members and a few politicians saying 40,000 killed is a low estimate in Gaza. The number killed is 100,000 or more killed in Gaza. Look, I would rely more on the figures coming out from Gaza. This is what's the most reliable. And they're saying that the number is approximately 29,000 now. If you added up the missing and bodies that weren't evacuated from under the rubble, that could be up to 40,000 now, even though they evacuated some of them. Still, it's not 100,000. There's 100,000 casualties. So with the wounded, you are talking about 100,000. But it's not that. Although there are people in Israel who are calling for that number to be 100,000. Like people on live, big journalists in Israel, famous journalists, they will go out on live television and tell you from the first hit, we should have killed 100,000 people. DL Sandro, question Mahmoud, I recently learned that there is secular left-wing resistance group in the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine and Gaza. I'm interested in learning more about them. Can you comment on it? Yeah, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine is a leftist Marxist movement, a very well-rooted Palestinian movement. It was formed by a man called George Habash, who is a Palestinian Christian, who was expelled from an area close to Lid or Rumley, I think, in 1948. He formed the Palestinian Front for the Liberation of Palestine. It had a couple of offshoots. You then had the general command of it or whatever, but they were still active in Gaza. They're a secular movement calling for a one state, one secular state in Palestine, for everyone really to live in. They're obviously, in terms of military power and capabilities, not as strong as the religious-backed movements, like movements that establish their ideology on religion, like Hamas and the PIJ. But they're active, obviously, because from Hamas's perspective, they empowered and supported all of the groups that won resistance, even though they are ideologically far apart. But everyone who kind of believed in the resistance path, they supported them. So that's just briefly about them. And the name Abu Ali Mustafa Brigades, the armed wing name, is after one of their previous leaders who was assassinated by Israel following his him carrying out, or being behind an assassination of an Israeli minister in the early 90s or late 80s. And thank you for everyone sending me good comments. I'm browsing through some of them. Just because of the time limit, we're just gonna move to the kind of main remaining questions before we wrap up. Interesting from FP Salaz Mahmoud. I appreciate your time in answering the question. Question is prolonging the war benefiting the USA and the UK and other countries because of the arms sales? As in, between commas, pretty sickening. Look, the military-industrial complex has a lot of benefit from every war. When the US went to Iraq, they got rid of all of the previous ammunition, and they renewed and refreshed everything. And who's making money? Who's making the money off the blood of people? The military-industrial complex. And I spoke about them in my book. They're very, very dangerous, the military-industrial complex. They're definitely benefiting. They are absolutely benefiting. The question is, until when, really? Another question here. They're benefiting, but the support of the US and the UK is not just tied for the military-industrial complex's benefit. That's obviously part of their existence and their actions, motives supporting the military-industrial complex. But they also have geopolitical reasons, like Israel's location. Israel is splitting the Arab world. Israel is very strategic when it comes to trade. Israel goes away, many problems will go away if Israel goes away. Like we were talking about changes and stuff. Now, clearly, they're the problem. They have always been the core problem. They're like a cancer in the Middle East. But now it's looking more evident that they are way more of a problem. And obviously, they've always tried to portray themselves as this Western haven in the Middle East. We saw your Western little country and how beautiful it is with this genocide that they're committing. And we Palestinians know your beautiful Western country from a very long time ago. But they'll obviously spread their lies and their propaganda because it's their neo-colonial project. It's their last colony in the Middle East. They're not going to give it up that quickly. But it's becoming more and more untenable. Okay, let's take one last question before we go. And I'm sorry if I missed some of the questions, and thank you for all of those who participated. Zain the Pain, thank you so much. I'll keep it with Zain. Okay. How do you think a one state could work living beside people who have committed genocide against your people? Same as Muslim in India, you will never be equal. Well, it's because of the number one, if the implemented law, if the system implemented is genuinely equal, people will have to live with it. Let me give you an example. South Africa. Do you think all of the European or white-backed South Africans changed completely their views after the apartheid ended? No, they didn't. Similarly, if we reach a one-state solution in Israel, does that mean racism will evaporate and people won't think they're still superior and won't view the others as goyim, for example? No, they will remain there. But they can't do anything about it because the state doesn't enable it. And the state protects everyone equally. In terms of how do you think people committed genocide against your people, it's also both ways. Obviously, no, it's incomparable, but it's both ways. They will have to accept the fact that people who committed the 7th of October are living with them. So it's a two-way thing. And again, you don't make peace with your friends, you make peace with your enemies. And in many nations, in many feuds, in many fights and wars all across the world, you've had the worst atrocities in the world committed, right? But then you've reached solutions. And again, that's not to say like it's all going to be magical and beautiful the next day. You know, on this earth, we don't have complete justice or something perfect. There's constant work for something that's close to perfect or good, right? Sometimes good is good enough. But yeah, and obviously that's something that will take time. It will take education, re-education, it will take lots of things, and it will take time. And sometimes you might need a generation or two, right? After you dismantle the ethno-supremacist cult, right? I hope that clarifies. And thank you so much for everyone joining me, everyone new, obviously, who joined for the first time, everyone who commented, everyone who participated, all of the nice comments. I'm sorry if I was unable to address all of them, but obviously we're limited. Look, I always tell myself an hour, and I always give over half an hour on top of that. But thank you all very much. Again, if you're new, I do these live streams regularly, primarily for you. Because like I said, if you want to kind of constantly go back and forth with more people viewing, you can't keep up. And many people have many questions that to others might seem very basic, but to them it could mean a lot in terms of them getting an understanding, shaping their view, and getting to know a bit more about what's happening. So I'm doing this regularly every night, inshallah, hopefully, God willing, every night. Obviously, I might need a break sometimes. You can give me a break. But at 9:30, approximately 9:30, that's apart from my regular videos that I do, because not everyone likes to watch live streams. So I'll still have the video for the video fans. Again, thank you so much for joining me, and I will hopefully see you soon in the next video. Enjoy your night, day, evening, depending on where you are. And thank you very much for tuning in. Take care.